If you don't know, now you know. Welcome everybody to our classroom, and we're fortunate this evening to have Katherine Trejo with us, the author of Jefferson, actually, in Realidad Es Yefferson. And Catherine's first generation Salvadoran-American. Whoop, whoop. You already know I'm going to ask you about pupusas at some point. Um, she's also a graduate of UC Santa Cruz and lives in historic Filipinotown in California. Katherine lives in the same apartment complex in which she grew up, which is awesome and amazing. And I'm sure there's so much you could say about community, having experienced it growing up as a child, but also now as an adult. And the book that she published, she did so, co-authored it with Mr. Scott Martin-Rowe, who was her high school teacher, her favorite teacher in high school. And don't tell anybody that we told you this, but she was Scott's favorite student.
That's correct.
Happy to have you here this evening, Katherine. Thank you so much for being with me.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. I'm a big fan of you and Lorena and the work that you do to support educators, schools, students. So it's honestly my pleasure to be here. So thank you.
Well, we have this beautiful book.
There it is.
Jefferson, actually, Realidad Jefferson, and kudos to you, to Scott, to Karla, to Little Libros for this publication. So necessary. And I want to go ahead and start with the notion, the premise of this book, which is say my name, right? Say my name correctly, right. Which I could relate to this because, you know, people have trouble rolling their R's. So Roberto doesn't get off as smoothly, and they, you know, they want to call me Robert. Is it okay if you call me, you know, if I call you Robert or Bobby? I'm like, yo, my name is Roberto. Rob. Like, nah, you can only call me Rob if we cool. You know, if I know you, if you're my people, then I give you that space. You can call me Rob. I don't know you like that. Call me Roberto. And then you get into the last name, and it really trips people out because, you know, you read it on paper in English, German. But, you know, I'm Dominican. It's pronounced Herman. So, you know, for some people, it's like, it's too, they're not even trying. And that irritates me. So, I was really feeling this book because it resonates with me as somebody who has a name that doesn't roll off as easily for others. So this is inspired by your nephew, who we've talked about a little bit. And why don't we start by can you just state his name and how you pronounce his name so that all of us, the audience, hears from you, like how
can see a performance.
His name, so we say it right.
So first, I'm glad that you connected with the book. So it's really interesting because it's a little bit different in English and a little bit different in Spanish. So in English, which is what I call him the most in English, the English pronunciation is Jefferson, and then in Spanish it's Jefferson with an emphasis on the son, Jefferson. And I think when you did your video for TikTok, you got the pronunciation perfect. I was like, oh, he's also like emphasizing the son, Jefferson. And I was like, no, that's
funny. This is a funny thing because earlier, like a couple hours ago, we having dinner. Lorena, my wife, she was like coming at me and saying, oh, you have trouble saying his name. You're saying it wrong. And I'm like, nah. I'm not sure that I am, but this is one of my questions. And so I'm so glad that you said this, and I know she's watching right now, and I'm feeling really vindicated and affirmed. Yes,
she's
indeed.
Like, here we go.
Here we go. Yes, indeed.
No, it was perfect. So so it's really interesting because it's like me and my cousin are like Jefferson, and then you hear like the grandmas and the tias and all like the Spanish speakers like Jefferson, like all around the house. So it's funny how even within English and Spanish, there's a little bit of distinctions even within those names.
And so why is it important that we pronounce names correctly?
Yeah, you know,
and I know that seems like an obvious question,
right?
But we know from experience that while it seems so obvious, we still have to address people all the time about this because
That's
they're
correct.
saying our names wrong.
Correct. Yeah. And you know what? And there's so many unique reasons why we should actively always be trying to pronounce and spell folks' names correctly. But two reasons that I really like really came to mind as I was thinking about this question is, so one is like in the book, in Jefferson, actually, our main character is named after his grandpa, and he loves being named after his grandpa. So, you know, it really got me thinking about all the people named after loved ones, or people that they really care about, or just people who have given themselves also new names, right? And how that alone is a good enough reason to always honor the pronunciation and spelling of their names. And then I also thought about usually folks whose names are mispronounced and misspelled often, something that we see them do a lot is they're always apologizing or thinking that their name is really burdensome. So I think actively trying to learn and always putting in the effort to pronounce and spell someone's name correctly, like reassures that person, like, no, your name is not a burden. And you should never be apologizing for your name ever. You know, like if anything, we should be apologizing for not trying enough to make sure that we're constantly and actively making sure that we're making them feel comfortable and honoring the way that their name is supposed to be said and spelled. So those are two reasons that I could that just really came to mind. And the last thought that I wanted to, because I was like, at this question, I was like, oh my God, it's such an important question, because I was even thinking about the politicization of names, like in history. Like when we think about how people have been denied access to university because of their names, right? Have
Facts.
been denied jobs because of their names, you know, like it goes even more deeper, right? When we think about that politicization and why names are important, and they have real life complications, right? Or how people experience microaggressions because of their names. I don't know if you saw this going around, but it went viral. This young man named Jose, I think he's Guatemalan. He said that when he was going through TSA or the airport, that the TSA person was like, oh, like your mom gave you the most common name ever, that being
Wow.
Jose. And he responded with like, well, Jose is not common at Harvard, which is like where he's attending school at.
Wow.
And I was like, what a great comeback. I'm
Oh,
like,
that's a
it's
good
the
clap back. I
right.
love it.
And I was just like, you know, like that microaggression in that moment, like that xenophobia, like was not like that was so uncalled for, right? But it also got me thinking about those implications as well, right? So it's just like there's history behind this, right? And why names are important. Or just even thinking about I don't know if you read the book Your Name is a Song by Jamila Tompkins.
I have
There's
not.
a oh my God, I'm gonna that one's so good too. But Jamila in the book has like a really beautiful line around when African people were taken from their home, right? And how they were given new names, and how now in the US, right, or everywhere, all the places where African descendants are at, they've had to reimagine new names for themselves, right? That's also a line that got me. I was just like, oh, this is like, there's so many reasons why. So, like I said, there's so many unique reasons why names are so important. Um, yeah.
And the thing is that names tell a story too. So
Correct.
when
Yeah.
you try to twist my name, you're messing with my story.
Right. Your identity, like like who you are. Definitely. Yeah. I agree.
For me, you know, it's important that we stress to people that they say our names right, because it's also part of how we continue to control our own narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You're
that's a
doing
really
what you're
great
doing
point.
over here, but when you confront me, I'm driving my narrative. Don't try to change my name. Don't try to change my story. Don't try to change my narrative. And so it's another reason why I appreciate what y'all did with this book.
Yeah, and I think it's about also teaching children at a young age, right? Like that point that you're making. Like it's I think folks underestimate children so much, but it's just so great to see how much they understand about the world and about themselves, right? And making sure that we're constantly instilling that confidence and
Right.
making sure that they feel like they have control of something, right? Even as something as simple as making sure their name is being said correctly.
Right. Self-advocacy. So who did you have in mind when you wrote this, and why did you write to them?
Yeah, so I feel like there was like so many people I was thinking about, right? I'm sure like, you know, like family, friends, like it's like a whole community, right? But I tried to dwindle it down to three for this interview. But obviously my nephew Jefferson, right, who inspired this story. But at its core, something that I love about this story is that this story is a story for all children that have a name that start with an A. That are traditionally spelled with a J, right? So I'm talking about like all the Yamies, the Jasons, the
Mm.
Jessicas, the Yennifers, like
Yolivel.
that's another one. I mean, the list goes on and on of all the beautiful names that start with a Y. So a big part of this book is really dedicated to them because it's such a their spelling and like the way that like their names are spelled right and kind of like the derivate. I always like to think that Jefferson's name is a great clash of cultures. Like it makes me think of maybe his family, his mom was like, "Oh, I really want to give him, you know, a name that's maybe common in America."
Yeah.
But then in Spanish, the J sounds like a Y, and it's like this clash of worlds coming together. So it's really cool to kind of see how it all comes together and like makes its own story and narrative. Additionally, I was thinking about BIPOC children, like my nephew Jefferson, specifically Central American and Salvadorian children of all races who would see themselves and their families represented in this book. And also, which is why I'm so glad that you said that you connected with this book, is because I also thought about adults when I was writing this book. I had so many adults tell me that they still have trouble correcting others on how to pronounce their name and spell it, and how the book has really helped them recognize like why it's important to do that, right? So I think that this book is for children as for adults as much as it is for children, you know. And there's so much we can learn. I love reading children's books. It's like one of my favorite pastimes. So we could learn so much from them.
Absolutely. And why do you think educators should teach this book?
I think it's a great book to teach in a classroom because one of the themes that I hope resonates, and then you named it, is encouraging and teaching children about self-advocacy. I strongly believe that if we start to teach children self-advocacy, it's something that will follow them into adulthood. So now you have these adults that are like asking for raises, right? And are speaking up when something isn't right, you know, like teaching them really early on, make sure that they continuously do it. But not only that, it's also advocacy that will transform into advocacy for others, right? Now they're advocating for other children, other
Right.
groups, and other people as well. And something that I do want to point out is that in the book, not only does our protagonist Jefferson correct his peers, he also corrects adults. It
Hmm.
was so important for Scott and I to make sure that we show that depiction to children because one, we don't want them to be afraid to speak up to adults. I think that I'm a strong believer that adults need to start to decentralize themselves and start to really center children and kind of like their needs and actively start to listen to children, right? And in some cases, change their behavior. Like if a child is asking you to do something different or saying that something is wrong, like we need to listen, right? And not pretend like adults are the end all be all. So it was really important for us to show that, you know, that in the book, Jefferson is telling his children, his teachers and adults in his life that no, you're saying this wrong, and then actively showing that they're changing, right? Because they heard him say that. So, I mean, so if there's adults who are going to read this book and then they, and it's like they're teaching children about advocacy, and then children are now doing what they taught them, right? They're advocating for themselves. Like I
Right.
hope like adults embrace it, you know, and they welcome and they're like, oh, that's what I taught you to do. Like that's great.
Yeah, and I think for many adults, there's some rewiring that needs to take place, but we should build in feedback cycles, right? Where students are given the opportunity to share some feedback. And even in our household, right? As
Yeah.
parents or adults playing parent-like roles, that
Mm-hmm.
should make space and make it a habit for our children to be able to offer some feedback, right?
Yeah.
And then we should actually implement, whenever appropriate, the feedback it is that they offer. So I love that. And I'll follow it up with asking, how would you like to see educators and others use this?
That's a good question. I mean, ideally, you know, I think it's a great book that can take children to some difficult, you know, if they're trying to overcome difficult situations, I think that a lot of like the themes in the books, especially around self-advocacy, can help teachers ground themselves, like can help them have like a grounded conversation with children through using the book, right? Like, and the great thing about books is that there's imagery, right? There's
Mm.
expressions, like, you know, it's like a tool. That's what I like to think about this. Because when I first thought about writing this book, I was like, I want to make a tool for Jefferson to be able to like something to reference back to constantly, right? Like when he's not feeling sure about himself or he's like, you know, second guessing like what he's doing. Like I want him to be able to come back to the book. So I'm hoping that teachers and adults will constantly come back to this book, right? To make sure to reassure their children, right, that what they're doing and correcting folks and feeling confident advocating for themselves is the correct thing.
Right. And they could just look at this example when Papa Jefferson asked, so what are you going to say tomorrow when they say your name wrong? Y vos, ¿qué le vas a decir mañana cuando pronuncien mal tu nombre? Jefferson's like,
Mm-hmm.
It's Jefferson, actually. En realidad, es Jefferson. So, Papa Jefferson models for us how it is that we could bring, in this case, a young person, but anybody, into the conversation and help them process their own thoughts in terms of
Exactly.
how can I approach this, and not just let people off the hook, and not allow for people to keep saying my name wrong, and then I'm internalizing that. No, all right, how do I want to address this? And then Jefferson has an opportunity to essentially practice that with Papa Jefferson and his parents.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite scenes because I remember me and Mr. Rowe, Scott, I call him Mr. Rowe because he's my high school English teacher. We were talking about how we're like
And
we
he's
don't
probably like, you call me Scott.
yeah, he's like, call me Scott. I'm like, I can never call you Scott. And we were like, we don't want the adults to give Jefferson, the protagonist, the answer. We're like, we want him to process and sit and come up with the answer on his own. And that's like one of my favorite scenes because it shows just how um it shows how creative and how children can actually work through some of their emotions, right? And sometimes it just takes a little bit of support from his family. So that's like such a great scene because it's just like it shows like how he processes and like comes up with an answer on his own.
Absolutely. And you chose to publish this book the traditional route with little libros. Why did you choose to do that instead of self-publishing, and how has publishing through the traditional route benefited you?
Yeah, so self-publishing, Mr. Rowe and I didn't like he knew a little bit because he's an English teacher and he's just a writer in general. I knew zero about the publishing world or about books, besides what I saw like on TV and movies, which seemed unrealistic. And usually portrayed you know, white folks, you know, having those opportunities, right? So self-publishing was never it was never an option that we looked into. It was always going through the traditional route. And I think I had so many doubts, right? And I think this comes from just like my own, like, you know, the way I grew up and everything. But Mr. Rowe was so sure that this book, someone was gonna want it. He was so sure. It was me always like with the negative thoughts. And I think after a while he started to like make me feel like, you know what, maybe, yeah, maybe this will get picked up. So to be complete, we sent it to everybody, everyone and their moms. You know, and most of the agents that we sent it to, and we still don't have an agent for the book or just as general as authors, but when we were sending it out to agents, predominantly white agents, which is still very much the norm in like the traditional publishing
Right.
world, they were having a really hard time connecting with the book, which I was not surprised about, you know, and it was discouraging to see that. But then we sent it to Patty and Ariana, which are the founders of Little Libros, who are also two Latina moms, right? And had a very similar experience to Scott and I, which is like people didn't think that the board books that they wanted to put out about Latinx figures was going to sell, you know, so they were very familiar with like They were very empathetic to our story around like, you know, getting denied a bunch of times, but they instantly connected with the story. Like they knew it would resonate with the larger Latinx community. Like they knew that names were so important in the Latinx community, and they're like, we want to publish this book. And honestly, when they said when they're like, we're ready, I was like, all right, cool. All you need is one person, just one
Right.
person to say yes, and it just kind of like opens up this door. And Little Libros is a small publishing company, right? They're not like the really big houses like Penguin, etc. But you know, they're really making a name for themselves, right? And you know, they're gonna be coming out. They just fundraise like community dollars, like $3 million from the community to continue this work. And they're going to be publishing so many more books, so many more diverse books within the land about Latinx communities. So it just made sense, and just working with them was so great. I think it was like we got to learn so much about just the publishing process, and they made us feel part of the process the whole time, which I really enjoyed, right? Because it's our first book. It's like, you know, it's like your first baby, like, you know, you want it to be in good hands. So, you know, I feel really appreciative that Ariana and Patty really believed in this book and gave it a chance, and also took a chance on us as first time authors, and published the book. And something that I always remember is, oh, and just to add, we've actually been featured now on 3 best of lists, including the New York Public Library and Chicago Public Library. So I'm like, to those agents that didn't want us, you know.
Right.
You know,
True.
so it's great that we're getting some recognition for the book, and it's our first book, so it feels really, really good.
That's awesome. You're making certainly the Salvadorian community proud, and the folks in
Thank you,
Philadelphia,
Roberto.
like, you know, us as biopic folks in general. And this book is necessary, not just for biopic folks, but for everybody. You know, we need little white children and white adults and folks to read this and connect with it and understand it. Like, all right, you might not, just like those agents, you said, all right, you might not understand this, but we need you to lean into it a little bit, to consider our experience, right? Because there aren't enough publishing companies like Little Libros, and there
Mm-hmm.
aren't enough authors whose voices are getting amplified. And so kudos to you, kudos to Scott, kudos to Little Libros for seeing the potential in this
Yeah.
book and for staying committed to lifting up the voices of authors like you. I am so enthusiastic about what Little Libros is doing, and what you and Scott and Karla have done with this book. And
Thank
I'm a
you.
big supporter of the work. What advice do you have for writers interested in going the traditional route?
Yeah, some advice I would give writers is don't change your stories for others. I think
Love
that
that.
you're gonna, yeah, like, you know, like they're gonna ask you to change this, do this, tweak this. Like, stay true to your story, and I promise someone out there is like waiting for your story, right? There's someone out there that wants your story and needs it. And I think it's just so important to stay true to that story that you want to tell. Because even for a while, when we were getting so many no's on Jefferson, actually, I was like, even myself, right, like my own self-doubt, and I was even thinking like maybe we're going too heavy on the fact that he's Salvadorian, or you know, just his culture and stuff, and it made me think maybe that's what wasn't clicking and connecting with them. But you know, reflecting back now, like I think that wasn't the case, right? Like if anything, I'm glad that we stayed true to the story, and there was someone out there that did want the book. So stay true to your stories, like, you know, they matter.
That's you know, like, I'm not Salvadorian, and this connects with me.
Yeah,
You know, it's important to stay true to the story because you also don't know how it's going to impact others,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
It's your story to share with the world, and then, you know, the world's going to respond the way it does. But there are probably more people that connect with your story than any of these agents will realize.
Exactly. And I felt like when they were reading it, they were thinking about how they weren't connecting with it, but they weren't like
Right.
thinking about
That's the
everyone
problem.
outside of them. Yes, exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
like, even as we're speaking right now, I'm thinking about my 3 nieces. They're half Salvadorian, on the father's side, and I'm thinking like, oh wow, it didn't hit me earlier, but now I'm considering like, oh, I wonder how this story might resonate with them. Just
Yeah.
from the cultural aspect.
No, definitely. Yeah, it's just it's and I think that's something else too. I one thing that I'm super proud of too is that we also have helped put out a story that centers a Salvadorian child and like family. I think that there's not a lot of narratives out there yet covering our community, so it feels really great. And Jessica, who's at the end of the book, is Afro-Salvadoreña, so I'm super excited to see how we create a story. And she's actually inspired by my nieces. I have three beautiful nieces who are Afro-Salvadoreñas. Jessica was inspired a little bit by them. So, my nieces and nephews, there's so many of them. They all just inspire all the lovely stories that I want to create.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And often in, Latino America, we don't hear as much about the Afro side of our cultures, right? In all of these countries. And so thank you for doing that. Love it.
Yeah, definitely.
So what's your favorite part of the book and why?
My favorite part is when after he comes home after he's corrected everyone at school and he's in the tomato garden with his grandpa. That's one of my favorite images. I think Karla did such a great job at just capturing some really great tenderness and love and just affection between Papa Jefferson and Jefferson. And most importantly, I love that page because on the line, his grandpa asked him, "How was your day at school, Cipote?" And, Cipote is a term which is widely used by Central Americans and Salvadorians, meaning child. And growing up, I heard it around everywhere. My grandma, my mom, my tia, everyone calling us cipote this, cipote that. But I had never seen it like in any type of media. Like I had never seen it in books, on TV. So the fact that like little libros like didn't even bat an eye, they're like, of course, like put cipote in there, like let's make it a thing. And being able to introduce it to like other folks who maybe are not Central American or Salvadorian, and like just kind of also showcasing the diversity of the Latinx communities, right? Like we're so different across like race, like language, like food. Like it's just so great to be able to showcase that. So just it's so tiny. It's just one word, but like it's just like it has such a big impact and people have been noticing and they're like, oh my God, like, being able to see that word like, in a book is like so powerful and I'm just so happy that it's in there. So it's cool. And then you read Vos. We also had some voceo in there, which is also super cool in Spanish. So, it's really cool to just be able to like sprinkle it in, but it's just like people notice, right?
Absolutely. And I'm gonna start calling all the little kids around me cipotes,
Yes.
even if they don't know what it means. What's the message of encouragement to the people?
I think something that I've been telling folks is just screw the rules. Like I didn't know anything about writing or publishing, but I knew I had a story that I wanted to tell. And I
Right.
think really just grabbing a piece of paper, or we're in the future now, so like opening up a Google Doc, or a Word doc and just like starting to just like dump out all your ideas, dump out that story that you've been thinking about, and then just kind of go from there, right? Like work backwards. Like I'm actually trying to learn all the different forms of writing a picture book now after having been published.
Wow.
So work backwards, just write it and pace yourself. You don't have to finish something within the year, 2 years. Spending 15, 30 minutes on something that you really love, like really adds up in the end. And once you know it, like you have a finished product, and it's ready to start putting out into the world.
That's great. That's great. And where can people follow you? What platforms besides this one?
So actually, this is the only platform I have. So
Okay.
you can follow me here at Cat Baggins. And I'm currently working on a website. It's in my to-do of things to do. So hopefully a website very soon as well.
Awesome. Awesome. So your favorite pupusa spot?
Oh my God. Okay. So every time people ask me this, I get nervous because I feel like the only good Salvadorian food I've ever had is at my grandma's house, who's downstairs. But One of my
Nothing beats the home
right,
cooked.
but I was just in the Bay Area like a couple months ago, and I went to this spot on Mission, and it was the best pupusa I've ever had in my life. It was so good. It was perfect. It was not greasy. Everything was like melted perfectly on the inside. I'm forgetting the name of the restaurant, but it's in San Francisco, in Mission. It was like so amazing, and it's the best pupusa I've ever had. I'll send you the name afterwards so we could share it maybe,
Yeah,
but it's so good.
most amazing pupusa, and then say you forgot the
I
name of it. Wow,
know. It's that great.
that is
I
not
have memory
gonna
loss.
stop. Well, I appreciate you, and I'm looking forward to seeing this book
Thank
again.
you.
You that don't know or haven't copped it, please support this. Jefferson actually, in Realidad Jefferson, and certainly, as I stated earlier, we want to carve a few minutes for Q&A. So if you have some questions, please add them to the chat now if you have some questions. I should also let you know that we will be doing a giveaway of this book. So please stay tuned. If you don't follow us, you're going to want to follow us if you want this book at Multicultural Classroom. If you do follow us, but this is your first time having some contact with Kat Trejo, make sure you follow her now at Kat Baggins. Also, be sure to follow her co-author, Scott Martin-Rowe, and the illustrator of the book, Karla Monterrosa.
Thank
You want to
you.
follow the publishers, Little Libros. Why? Because they publish our stories.
That's
And
correct.
again, we are controlling our narrative. So let's not just talk about it, let's be about it. Let's support the individuals and organizations that amplify the voices of biopic authors. You already know this is our classroom, Roberto Germán. Again, feel free to add a question in the chat. We have a few minutes before we wrap up. Thank
And
you.
my
Yes, following. All right. Yes,
my
follow
cousin
Kat.
actually put the name of the put the name of the restaurant. Es La Santa Neca. That's the name of the restaurant.
Okay,
In
prima.
in ese in ese it's yeah. My cousin just put it. He was actually just there, and I was like, "You need to go to that restaurant," and
Okay,
he
prima.
went.
Okay, prima. Thank you for bailing Kat out. And you said that San Francisco?
It's an SF, and it's honestly the best pupusas I've ever had. And then someone
Okay.
else who I follow, who's Salvadorian, told me about it, and I was like, I can't believe this. There's no way. And then I went, and she was right.
Wow. I was in San Francisco. It's been several years at this point. I was there for a conference listening to Brian Stevenson, who was amazing. But now I'm gonna have to go to San Francisco for a different reason. You know,
Yes.
I'm gonna have to go for these
And
pupusas.
then you have to text me and tell me if it was true.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, doesn't look like we have any questions, so won't keep you any longer than necessary. Kat, it's been my pleasure,
Thank you,
and
Roberto.
follow. I knew about the Chicago and New York thing because I'm following your pages and whatnot. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Look
I
forward to
appreciate
hearing
it.
more of these reports, and to keep sharing this on my side. Continue to share with
Thank
people,
you.
and to buy this text and use it as a source of inspiration for you to write your own story, to tell your own story, and to check people when they say your name incorrectly.
There it is. On that note, perfect ending. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to your family for supporting this book. I'm so glad that I sent it to you when I did. This was really awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.